So when I was a youngster, my mom used to take me for walks in Pine Grove Cemetery in New Bedford. So from what I'm told, I was in the carriage, and that's how it started. And then when I was old enough to walk, she would take me for walks, and I got to read and I got to learn numbers and how to pronounce things from looking at the gravestones. And I was really interested in the older ones, the slate and the marble ones from the 17 and the 1800s. And when I would see something that was broken, it really disturbed me, even at that age, saying, this is going to be lost. And how do you preserve it? And so I started even handwriting notes and epitaphs and things like that. And I did that all up through my high school years. I was doing that till the point where I had, thousands of these. And, you eventually move on to other things in life, your work and your family, but the passion never went away. And so in 2019, Betty Slade had posted, I don't know if it was a social media post or Historical Society, I think I read it in the newspaper, that there was going to be a gravestone cleaning tutorial at Westport Point. And they were bringing in Professor Norman Weiss from New York and Rusty Brenner, who's one of the leading conservators in the country from Texas. And they were going to teach the process. Now, as a kid, I had seen people clean gravestones with acids, things like bleach. And I knew that wasn't the appropriate chemical anymore. That there were other things, but not knowing what they were, I said, well, I'll attend this and maybe I'll learn and have some fun. And there were about 35 people that first one. And we learned a lot. I learned a lot, and it just reignited that passion. And there were a couple follow-up cleaning, as well. And Betty had said, I wish there was somebody that was interested in taking over and kind of being a project manager for this on a local level in Westport to do this in our cemeteries. And I said, I'd be interested in that. And that fall, we kind of created a plan and we went forward from there. So there are 106 cemeteries in the town of Westport that we know of that are registered. And that's a lot of cemeteries. Some of them are very small. You may have 2 or 3 graves. Some of them are don't even have markers. But then you have the public cemeteries, which all go back. In fact, all the cemeteries in Westport go back into at least the 1800s. So there's a lot of history, a lot of stones, and Ted Kinnery from D2 Biological Solutions was providing the cleaning solution. So we weren't spending money. It was just our volunteer time to do the work. But I kind of liken the finished project to somebody who hasn't been to the dentist in 10 years and suddenly goes. And we all know people who have not been to the dentist, right? And then they go and you see them and it's like, wow, look how clean their teeth are. What you didn't realize before is that the 2 teeth in the front are broken. And we never noticed that because everything was so dirty. That's what it was like when the cemeteries started to get clean, particularly starting at Westport Point. He said, the stones look great, but there's these, as it turned out, about 40 that were broken. And we said, well, what would it cost to get this stuff fixed? So I reached out to a couple of conservators, the one from Texas and another one that I knew in New York, and found out that the average price to restore one gravestone was anywhere from $400 to $500, just as a general. And we got a little bit of sticker shock. I said, wow, I didn't realize it was that, expensive, and that how difficult it was to find people to do it. So Betty had worked with CPA, and she was the chairperson of the committee, and said, I know how to do this, the paperwork that has to be done and how you apply for it. And so she said, hey, I'm going to do this. And so I was working with a fellow named Norm Anderson at the time, who is the distributor for D2, living in Adamsville, and said, all right, have at it. And the following spring, we heard back from the state that they had approved for, it was over $50,000 for cemetery restoration work in the public cemeteries. Great, now we get the money, let's get started. But we quickly realized that with that amount of money, we could probably fix maybe 100 gravestones. And we have over 10,000 stones in town, and there's probably close to, 2,000 that need some type of repair. So we weren't going to be able to finance that. And I think it was Norm who came up with the idea and said, what about if we bring in someone who can train us to do this work, and we can use that CPA funding to buy our tools, our materials, and to pay him to teach us what we need to learn, and then we can do the work. And that's what happened. And through Ted again, we made contact with Jonathan Appel from Atlas Preservation in Connecticut, who is also one of the nation's leading restoration conservators. And we brought him to Westport. And Troy Rebello and I and our other partner, Don Young, we worked probably 75 hours, close to 75 hours, certainly for Troy and I, one-on-one with Jonathan, most of the time in our own cemeteries, learning how to do the restoration work. And here we are, over 4 years later, we've repaired just under 1,000 gravestones in Westport, just in Westport, and we've spent less than half of the money. Most of the stones in Westport that we work on are made of marble. The older ones, and we've done some in Westport, and we've done a lot outside of Westport, are made of slate. In other areas in New England, you'll see sandstone, and you'll see some other materials. Schist is one, but a lot of our work is with marble. And up until, marble, they began to use this in earnest around 1815, 1820. And they were initially single sheet marble tablets that were 2/3 above ground and 1/3 below ground. And that's not a great construction design because a lot of these tablets were thin, maybe 2 inches thick, and they could be 50, 60, we have one that's 78 inches tall that we're working on now in another town. And so these ended up breaking. And so after about 1850, they started to use bases, and they would use Connecticut River or Western Mass brownstone as a base. It's soft, it's easy to carve, and they would put the stone, the monument, into this base, this brownstone base. They'd cut a keyway, and this was all done by hand. This is all hand tools, no internet, no power tools, nothing like that. The craftsmen were incredible. They really were artists. And you get to about 1870, and now the stones not only have a base, but they have a plinth, which would be a separate piece between the base and the tablet. Made it look more ornate. This was the Victorian era. There was a lot of things like this coming into play. The pieces would be joined by pins. So a lot of times they would be copper. Unfortunately, some were made out of iron, which can cause we see a lot of problems with those. But over time, the seal between the different components would break, which is normal. Iron particularly can cause a lot of problems if you have them as pins. So you'd have these pins that would be hammered into place, holding the components of the tablet or of the monument upright. Over time, the seal would break. And when the seal breaks, water gets in. And when water gets in, you're going to have all the impurities that come with the water are going to get in there as well. So you have rust. You have copper oxide staining, which is like a blue-green color. You have iron staining, which is like a really rust-colored orange-red color. And once particularly iron rusts, it starts to expand. You think about the pictures you've seen of the Titanic with these things called rusticles. We have looked inside, taken some of these apart, and you've got an iron pin in the middle of a gravestone that's expanded. It can be up to 7 times its original size. So that's causing a lot of pressure to that marble stone, and they start to crack. You walk into a cemetery that has a lot of these marble stones, you know there are pins when you see the crack lines going right down the center of the tablet, right in the middle. You say, there's the pin. And so pinning, you can do pins today. They sell them. Most people don't recommend them. We rarely, in fact, of 12, almost 1,300 repairs, I've only seen pins used once in a repair job. And it wasn't a job that we were supervising. We were just kind of assisting with. You don't need the pins today. And so if you can remove them safely, there are ways that you can try to remove it. You can certainly cut them. But as far as being able to extract the entire pin, sometimes they just fall out. And the reason that they do fall out is because they were put in place with liquid sulfur. They would pour sulfur in and put the pin in, and that was what they used to bond. And over time, the sulfur dried out. We've got buckets of this dried out sulfur that we've picked up in doing repairs sometimes. And so there are other materials that we can use today. We still use, monument setting compound. We'll use certain epoxies that are approved for this type of work. And that's how we would do, a restoration on a marble stone. If you have stones that are fractured, you will have stones that get fractured for a couple of different reasons. One is vandalism, okay? We've had to deal with that. We've had situations where lawnmowers have caused damage, considerable damage. And you will also see damage that's caused by frost heaves. So as you go through these frost cycles, the freezing and thawing, the ground can actually throw up these stones, for lack of a better term, and they may be leaning one way, leaning another way. And once they do lean, you start to put pressure on those joints. Eventually, it won't be long before they fail. And a lot of these are 200 years old. So yeah, you do expect that you're going to have the wear and tear. Sometimes it depends on the quality of the material as well. We have some that it's called sugaring. Once you get enough impurities, or the stone itself had a lot of impurities in it, it just starts to degrade. And we can pick up a stone today that's been sitting in the dirt for 15 years and have it be pristine. And there are other times we'll pick one up and it's sugaring considerably. The marble is just degrading and it feels just like sugar, like granulated sugar, as you touch it. And it's unfortunate, but there's not a whole lot that can be done for those. So, you just try to do no harm, number one, and try to restore things as best you can. To get the approval of the town is key. And Betty Slade went to the town administrator, who at the time was Tim King, and Jim Hartnett has, certainly continued that association that we've had, and said, look, these folks have been trained. They have CPA funding to be trained. They have purchased all the materials and the tools, everything through CPA, and they're going to be doing this restoration work. And what we want is the ability to go into the cemeteries and do this work. So have a blanket approval to do that, unless family members opt out. Okay, that's number one. And number two would be insurance, so that when you're working in a town cemetery, you would have the ability to know that, okay, you're covered in case something happens, in case something goes wrong. And thankfully, in almost 1,300 repairs, we've never had an incident where someone needed an ambulance or needed, to take time off of work because of some serious injury. We haven't had any of that. Safety is really, really important to us. And Troy Ribello, such a talented guy. In addition to his work, safety is always on his mind. And he, when we're teaching in another place, he may say to a group of people, look, don't stand here. And you could explain to people, we're not just trying to be, taking control, but we're saying, hey, look, if something falls, this is what I see happening. And this is where the danger zone would be. And so he's really good at that. And he'll do that with me sometimes. We're doing something, he'll say, you know what, are you sure you want to stand there? And I think about it and say, oh, you're right. So it's always on his mind. But once the town gave us that approval and that support, we've been able to work in probably 40 of the Westport cemeteries, and haven't had, there have been no significant issues. And we have a good working relationship with the Historical Society, the Board of Selectmen, and the town administrator. And we're grateful for that, because you have to be able to work together, to get things done. And in the end, it's beneficial to everyone, because the fair market value of the work that we have done in the town of Westport over the past 4 years is just under $500,000, because of us donating our time and our services. So, to be able to say, okay, we're going to hire somebody to come in and fix all our gravestones, unless you're independently wealthy, it's not going to happen. So it's been good for us, and it's been beneficial for them as well. So we have had, sometimes you're working at a cemetery that has 10 gravestones. And the first project that we did in 2024 was on Sodom Road, and it was on the Weatherlow Farm property. We were asked to go out there, and it was the Tripp Tabor Davis family cemetery. And there were only 10 graves. Some of them had been plowed under over years of farming that had taken place, and so we did a lot of work. That was our April project. In June, we worked on tribal land. We worked with the Pokanoket Nation of the Wampanoags on the Wayner Farm, and we were able to help with the resetting and discovery of 63 gravestones there. And this was all African American, Native American burial ground. It was really an honor for us to work there. It was a very spiritual experience in a lot of ways. We loved it, and we're honored to be part of it. And then in July, we started on Blossom Road at they call it the Babcock Gifford Cemetery is in some of the records. It's actually one of the Wardell family burial grounds. And we reset 99 gravestones there and discovered some that we didn't even know existed. And that went from July into September. So that was an extensive project. Then in October, we went back to Beech Grove, and some of the stones are starting to look yellow again or green again with biological growth. It had been about 3 or 4 years since we sprayed. So we sprayed 1,031 gravestones in a period of just under 3 hours. Got everything clean there so that we can, hopefully in the next year go into cleaning there again. Go back into, now that we've got clean gravestones, we can do some more repair work and restoration work. Beech Grove's a tough place to work because it's hot. There are not a lot of trees. And, once you get into June, July, August, if it's 85 and above and you got no shade, it can be difficult. We like the trees. We've planted trees in certain places. We've had donated trees at the old high school. The Friends North Burial Ground had really been vandalized and had fallen into disrepair for a lot of reasons. It's a high traffic area near the old high school. It was. And there was a giant spruce tree that was in there, upwards of 80 feet, I would say. And it was just continually dividing within itself to the point where it started to swallow a lot of the gravestones that were around there. And we said, you know what, this tree's got to come down. And that was part of it. The other part was that it was a haven for kids to hang out. And I could tell you the things that we found underneath there, you would never expect or want to find the stuff we found under there in a cemetery. You can use your imagination. So it had to go. And some people were upset because they said, well, that's my kids go to play there. And we said, well, you know what? Playground, burial ground, two different things, and they don't come together. So once the restoration was finished, we were given a donation And we used that donation to take down the tree. It cost us over $2,000. And we could have spent that money anywhere. We said, we want that tree to come down. And then we got 4 trees donated, 4 flowering trees, and we planted them at that site. So, hey, we took 1 down, we added 4 that are going to grow, and they're in a place where they're not going to interfere with the graves. We've put daffodils around them. We've had a sign erected that explains this burial ground, because a lot of the stones there are just field stones with initials carved in them, and sometimes dates. The oldest date there is 1799. But people would look at it and say, what are these? These are just rocks. Well, you read the sign, if you walk around, you'll kind of get an idea. And we've had a lot of people say to us, wow, it really looks like a cemetery now, you know, as opposed to the eyesore that it really was. And we're pretty proud of that, of the way that that project turned out. We had a lot of volunteer help as well. One of the interesting things that's happened because of this is when you're volunteering, you get noticed. And you don't expect it, and you're not going to look for it, but when you're volunteering, suddenly you have television and you have radio and you have newspaper people that are social media that are coming out and saying, wow, this is a great thing that you're doing. And you hope it's going to bring more volunteers, because that's where we are now. We're in a situation where in Westport, during COVID, we had a lot of help. And what we found was that help only gets sustained so long, and then people have other things to do. So for some people, it was a project of the moment. For us, it's not a moment, it's a movement. And so we need more people that will come out and help. I mean, if we had 1 hour of volunteer service for every 10 likes that we get on posts, we'd be doing okay. But see, a lot of it now, it's Troy and I doing a lot of this work. And kind of what happened from the attention is that other communities started to reach out to us and say, hey, look, can you teach? Sure, we can teach. That's one of our goals for 2025 is we would like to have a workshop in Westport, perhaps at Beech Grove, where it's free. People can come and learn how to clean gravestones and also see some of how this repair work is done, because we still see inappropriate repair material used all the time. Silicone, cement, liquid nails, things like this. So we'd like the opportunity to do that, and we would volunteer our time and our materials to come and do that. But Troy and I, and with Don Young, ended up establishing an LLC, TNT Gravestone Solutions, to work in other communities, because if you're going to work in other communities, you got to have the insurance, right? And if you're going to be traveling and, you can't use the materials and the tools and so forth that were purchased with CPA funds for use in Westport, I'm not going to take those to East Providence and use them there. So we had to kind of have a demarcation line, I guess is the way to explain it, and work that way. So right now, I mean, this isn't our full-time work, but we juggle between the Westport group and our TNT group and our full-time jobs. So it doesn't leave a whole lot of time. This time of year, we're doing a lot of assessments. Once it gets below 45 degrees, you can't do this work. And once it's above 85, really, you don't want to be doing the work, because the bonding materials, even if you're using mortars and things like that, if it's a 90-degree day, you could have a flash cure, things aren't going to set the right way, and you're going to feel lousy anyway. And you don't do your best work when it's 90 degrees out. You really don't if you're an outdoor worker. I mean, that's just the way that it works. So that's kind of where we are, and where we're hoping to go in 2025. I would go back to seeing myself at 10 or 11 years old and being so passionate about these old gravestones, and never imagining that 50 years later, here I am doing that work. It's rewarding, and I can speak for all of us. I never feel a sense of discomfort in a cemetery or spookiness or any of that. There's a sense of peace, a sense of benevolence, Maybe for me, because I've been in the cemeteries my whole life, I just don't have that fear. It could be almost nighttime, and some people are saying, "Oh, you're going to get out of there." Like, if I had lights, we work with lights, just to do what we do. Um, and after a while, you start to dream of them too. You dream, I found this place, and I've got to do this repair work, and what's going to happen, and your dreams kind of becoming reality.